Julian Assange's collateral murder video did not spark the outrage he had hoped for. And now, his alleged source, Private Bradley Manning, was in custody. Journalist Mark Davis was with Assange in the summer of 2010.
I believe he was a little bit paranoid, but I'm not surprised that he was in a state of high anxiety and highly security conscious.
MIRC.
Security conscious because Assange had another weapon in his arsenal. A secret database of U.S. government documents from the war in Afghanistan.
Injury or
Assange was more and more focused on what he saw as abuses within the U.S. government. Now he believed he had evidence of actual war crimes. Does he operate as if he's constantly being followed, constantly being watched?
Yes, because he probably is. This information was known. I mean, essentially important people knew he had this.
More surveillance around him than almost anybody else in the world.
One of the people on Assange's trail was Nick Davis, an investigative journalist from the Guardian newspaper in London. He had read about Manning's alleged leak to WikiLeaks and sensed a big story. So you started looking for Julian Assange?
He was lying very low, so it took me 4 or 5 days to find out where he was and make contact.
At a cafe in Brussels, Davis finally came face to face with Assange.
So my pitch was, let's create an alliance between The Guardian and other news organisations so that you get serious impact and so that it becomes impossible to stop us, because we're not just in one jurisdiction where the government or the courts might block us, we'll be scattered. And he rapidly locked on to that idea.
Straight out of a spy novel, Davis headed back to London with a secret passcode Assange had written on a napkin. One day later, he had the database.
Okay, so now this is actually pretty good, right?
Assange invited the New York Times and German newspaper Der Spiegel to join them. In an unprecedented collaboration, the three newspapers began to sift through the thousands of documents. So I've come here to London, to the headquarters of the Guardian newspaper, to meet up with some of the journalists who were holed up for weeks in a bunker with Julian Assange as they sifted through the secret cables and documents that were eventually to become known as the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs.
He is.
This is the famous bunker?
Yeah, it is.
David Lee is another investigative journalist with The Guardian.
These are some of the headlines that came out of the war logs, actually, the first batch,
yes.
About Afghan and Iraq. And
what were your impressions of Assange the man when you first met him?
He didn't behave like earthlings, He would stay up all night, tapping away at his laptop, and then suddenly he'd keel over and his leather jacket buttoned up to the neck and, crash and go to sleep where he lay.
The more than 90,000 documents revealed a side of the Afghan war hidden from public view.
We started coming across really interesting information about collusion between the Pakistani intelligence service and the Taliban. So this was rich stuff that was buried in this database.
If you want to see it on the map, then you can always use the other one.
But there was growing tension with Assange.
All of us came across material which was clearly likely to lead to the death of innocent civilians if we published it. All of us had the experience of bringing this to his attention and being told by him, in effect, if an Afghan civilian helps coalition forces, then they deserve to die.
Does Assange understand that there are flesh and blood consequences to the actions of, say, releasing secret documents?
He has to have it explained to him. He's not a person who's very high on empathy with other humans.
Finally, in the last few days before we published, he got it. And he made a rather crude attempt to make the material which he was publishing on the website safe by withholding 15,000 documents out of the total of 92,000. But it wasn't enough.
That's a direct quote.
On the eve of the launch date, names of Afghan civilians were still in WikiLeaks documents.
We go at 10 p.m. London time tomorrow.
On July 25th, 2010, WikiLeaks released over 70,000 classified documents on the Afghan war.
The material exposes an extraordinary range of abuses.
And all three newspapers published stories about the war logs.
Within 48 hours, other news organizations were finding material on the WikiLeaks website which clearly was dangerous. And that meant that the political damage was done. His moral authority was reduced. He'd made a terrible tactical mistake.
The release set off a firestorm in Washington.
The battlefield consequences of the release of these documents are potentially severe and dangerous for our troops, our allies, and Afghan partners.
Massive leak of secret files exposes true Afghan war.
There's a dozen camera trucks outside. That's surprising.
No, I knew if we did our work right, it'd have this effect. I knew this material was serious.
You've said that this is the most comprehensive history of a war.
Why specifically the focus on print?
Are there any circumstances in which you wouldn't publish information?
Julian Assange finally had the world's attention.
I think Twitter has just gone off the roof.
He went from that kind of hobo character, if you like, into a rock star. It's like having a hit movie overnight, and suddenly everyone wants to see you.
But that attention would come with a price. The press began to grill him.
Where, though, will all this lead? How far will his group go? Locations of weapons?
Absolutely.
For Channel 4 News.
Stephen thinks every gun pointed at me.
Still, Assange seemed confident he was beyond the reach of governments.
But I'm untouchable now in this country.
Untouchable, for now. But his star was about to be tarnished. This time, the leaks would be about him.